I love the smell of fixer in the morning. It smells like victory. You know what? I love to get down to the darkroom. Yeah, there's a few odors, but boy, it's peaceful and quiet, and you're in the dark. There's solitude. You can listen to your music if you want, or maybe not. I love to get into the darkroom. It's not like the old days where you had to go into the darkroom and knock off 30 or 40 prints for some client or whatever. Now it's a hobby. Now it's just the love of photography and the love of the darkroom. That's one of the advantages of shooting film, is the time in the darkroom. I don't see it as a chore. I try to get down into the darkroom about once a week. Okay. I've worked in different commercial darkrooms, probably 5 or 6 at different papers or different labs. And I've always had a darkroom either in my home or when I had a studio, I had a darkroom in the studio. But this is my home hobby darkroom, and it's a purpose-built room. Now you'll notice that it doesn't really have a giant sink like you're kind of envisioning. I just put towels down on the counter and then use like a basement sink. And this is sort of the wet side of my darkroom. So you can see I've got the 3 trays. This is for 8x10s that I'm going to print today. So we've got the developer, the stop bath, and the fix. I happen to use Ilford products. So this is the Ilford multigrade liquid developer. You mix it 1 to 9. I always mix up 2 liters of working chemistry. So this is the multigrade liquid. I also will use a powder developer. It's cheaper, probably a better way to go actually is with the powder, but today I was using the multigrade liquid. And then Ilford stop bath, and then Ilford rapid fix. So those are my 3 chemicals, and then I just wash in the tray afterwards. Hey, I used to have one of those vertical washers that everyone raves about, and you know what? I didn't find they washed my prints properly, and I had a whole bunch of prints go dark or go brown like 2 years later. They weren't washed properly. So I've switched back to this tray idea, and that's fine. Now on the dry side of my darkroom, I've got 2 enlargers. I've got a Leica V35, and I've got the Saunders LPL, which goes from 35mm up to 4x5. The Leica enlargers, the V35, only does 35mm. Funny thing about these enlargers, when I bought them used, they had multiple lenses. So I've actually got 2 of the 40mm lenses that work with the Leica enlarger. The Leica enlarger is autofocus. It's a premium enlarger. When they came out 30 years ago, they were $7,000 new back then. Anyways, I have the Leica V35, and then the LPL enlarger does up to 4x5. I've actually got a Nikon, a Rodenstock, and a Schneider 50mm lens. 50mm lens is what you need to print 35mm. But sharper yet, I have an 80mm lens. It happens to be a Schneider, which does really 120 film. But if you use the 80mm lens with 35mm negatives, you're only using the center of the enlarger lens, and it'll be sharper than any of my 50s. So I tend to use the 80mm lens all the time. You've got to have the enlarger a little bit higher, but I'm only using the center of the lens. Now, if I wanted to make 16x20s or 20x24s, I'd have to switch to the 50 because I wouldn't be able to get the enlarger high enough. Now for papers, I use 2 types of papers. I use Ilford multigrade resin coated. So if I was doing contact prints or work prints, I would use them as resin coated. And when I slip that in the developer, it's 1 minute in the multigrade developer. Now, when I'm making better prints, I use fibrebase paper. So it's Ilford multigrade glossy fibrebase. And now that needs a little more time in the developer, so that would be 3 minutes. And I do time each print 3 minutes in the developer. Very consistent. Now, today I'm printing 5x7s. I'm calling them postcards. I'm in a group called APUG. I'll put it in the link below. Analog Photographers User Group. It's an old chat. When chats began on computers, it was one of the first ones. I've been a member for a long, long time. And so it's a chat of analog photographers, and they have a postcard exchange where you sign up. Hey, I want to exchange postcards. So there's maybe 25 or 30 people sign up, and I send each of them a postcard, and each of them sends me a postcard. So that month I get 25 or so postcards in the mail, and I have to print now 20 or 30 postcards to mail out. Usually I just do 1 negative and I print the whole series of 30 or so postcards on the 1 negative, but today I'm going to send different people different ones just kind of randomly. So the negative I'm going to print was from the testing I did with the red pepper in the previous video. So the red pepper on a blue background, and I used various filters. And after I kind of analyzed the negatives a little closer, I decided I'm going to print the red pepper that was photographed with a yellow filter. So this is my basic exposure. Now, I don't do a test strip. I put the paper in and I make a print right away. Will it be good? No, but it should be pretty close. Like your negatives should be pretty close, that if you switch negatives and from different assignments, your first print should be within 1 or 2 or 3 seconds of what you're going to do. That's probably closer than you're going to get with a test strip anyways. So I never use a test strip. I just make the print. So this first print, my contrast grade is 2.5 and I'm 10 seconds. And so I develop it for 3 minutes in the developer. And so it needs a little bit of work. The first thing it needs is more contrast. So I go from grade 2 to grade 3 on the contrast. I dial that into the enlarger. Now I'm at grade 3, again, 10 seconds. So getting better, still no good. It needs a greater exposure. So instead of 10 seconds, let's go 13 seconds. So I started at grade 2.5, now I'm at grade 3. I started at 10 seconds, now I'm at 13 seconds. I would have done all that in 2 pieces of paper, but I'm trying to show you what I'm doing here. So it still needs a bit more contrast. So I'm going to dial the contrast up from 3 to 3.5 at 13 seconds. And you know what I do? This is a very simple negative to print. So what I would do normally is just do a corner burn. So underneath the enlarger, I'm going to do 13-second exposure, but I'm going to do another 13 seconds just kind of burning the corners in so that I've got a little bit of darker corners. I just like that. So this shot here is just the burn. So I've wasted a piece of paper so I could show you just what the burn looks like. It's very subtle, but I've got the corners brought a little bit in. You take that basic 13-second exposure, you add the burn, and you end up with a print that looks like this. So this is kind of like the final-ish print. So when I put the paper in, I always slide it all the way to the right-hand side. That way, once I get the borders figured out, they'll be consistent every time I print. So I always put the paper all the way to the right, just to get the borders the same. This is a 9-second exposure, and I'm going to do a 9-second pumping action burn. So a little bit more, just to get the edges in a bit. It's only one more of the total exposures. Trying to keep it burned in a little on the edges. And that's it. This is a very simple negative to print, and there we go. Now, into the developer for 3 minutes. So not only is it kind of the final print, it's the final piece of paper in the box. So I open up a new box of paper, and it's changed a little bit. So now my contrast on the new box was a little bit higher, and I like it better, but 13 seconds was way too dark. So I end up going with 10 seconds at grade 3.5 with this new paper, with the new box of paper, and a corner burn on every print. So I make, I don't know, 15 or 20 of these 5x7s of the pepper with the yellow filter. So then I think, well, what did it look like with the orange filter when I actually took the picture originally? So I've switched now to the next negative, which is the same shot but with an orange filter on the taking lens. So the filter darkens the blue, which is the background, and lightens the red, which is the pepper. So the pepper is a little lighter, and the background is a little bit darker. And again, this is like 10 seconds at grade 3.5 with this new box of paper. You get the idea. Now, one thing that I do know is that if I do a 10-second exposure and it looks fabulous as a wet print, it's going to dry down. It's going to look darker when it dries. So I kind of set my print up, all right, it's perfect at, let's just say 10 seconds. And then when I make my batch of prints, I make them at 9 seconds. So I just take a little bit of the darkness out of everything consistent across the board, because I know when they dry, they're going to dry down and they're going to go darker. So with fiber-based paper, that's just something to watch for. If you've got a 10-second exposure, looks great wet, maybe it's a 9-second exposure when it dries. Now, after I've made all my prints and I've got them washing, I do wash them for quite a while. It's supposed to be an hour. I might wash them for an hour. Then I lay them all out on towels to dry. And you know what? When they dry, they go darker. and they get like a wrinkle to them. So then you could put them under books, you could stack a pile of books on them and flatten them out that way. I happen to have a dry mount press because I had a commercial business. And so I just flatten them all in the dry mount press, and it takes a little bit of time. Every time I'm down there, I just swap them out, put some new ones in, flatten those ones out, and I'll get these mailed off for the postcard exchange. So it doesn't really end just with the darkroom time. With fiber-based paper, you do have to flatten them, but you can do it with books, and then you can enjoy them. I'm enjoying the solitude of the darkroom. Like I said, it's not like the old days where you had to hammer this stuff out. This is just a hobby now. This is just for fun. This is for the joy of photography. So why don't I make another print? Why don't I pick a different negative? So again, I've got this red pepper. I'm going to print this shot, again, shot with the yellow filter originally, and I just kind of like the mood of it. So I'm going to print it dark. There's an interpretation that's necessary. Remember what we started with on that first pepper? That's kind of like what it looked like literally, but you have to interpret it to make it into a photograph. That's where the experience comes in. You're not trying to reproduce this, you're trying to interpret this. And that's the trick. That's where you have to kind of think about, what is it that I want? Do I want the pepper lighter than the background or darker than the background? How am I going to interpret it? Every negative needs to be interpreted to make it into something worth looking at. So there's a literal interpretation, and there's, let's call it an artistic interpretation, where you've taken that original negative and you've made it into a print that you find more interesting. That's the tricky part. So as I've said, I've done the second pepper. I've done it with the yellow filter. And then I thought, well, why don't I do a couple of prints from the same shot with the orange filter and the original taking lens. So the pepper goes a little bit lighter, the background goes a little bit darker. So now, during the course of my printing session, I've printed 4 different negatives, 2 peppers, each with the yellow filter and an orange filter on the taking lens. And I've interpreted how I think I like it. Just enjoying the time in the darkroom. I make a couple of extra prints. I'll send those to people that I like. And, it was a fun session in the darkroom. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to enjoy the photography, enjoy the solitude. The reason you shoot film, in my view, is so that you've got something to print in the darkroom. And all of that fun and joy in the darkroom, you just can't beat it. That's the greatest part about photography, especially when you don't have to do it commercially anymore. The love of photography. That's what it's all about. The love of printing. Can't beat it.